Hear me? Great. So I'm Allie Camp, and I think the reason I've been asked to talk about this subject is because I've had so little success. So I've learned so many things in my failures. Usually I do learn the most. So I'm going to talk a little bit about mixed methods, and first I'm going to talk about sort of the ideal, how you would like to be able to publish mixed methods and what that might look like. And then I'm going to talk about reality, especially my reality of publishing in clinical journals. How many of you here, if you were going to publish mixed methods, would be trying to publish in a clinical journal? Okay, good. Good. So this will be relevant to many of you. And then Bethany is going to contrast that a little bit with publishing in different types of journals that might be more compatible or might be easier for mixed methods. I'm going to talk about the challenges, how to pick a journal, and then how to deal with some of the challenges. So I'm just going to go back and do a little bit of review in case people are not focused.
You're fine.
Where you first start with the qualitative portion, and that informs a quantitative portion. In this example, you do, say, focus groups with staff in a practice, and that helps you identify themes that you're then going to use in a quantitative approach, like a survey, okay? And then you're going to, ideally, then you would compare the qualitative results from the focus groups to the quantitative results from the surveys and discuss whether they were consistent, whether different issues were emerging or in the same direction, and what you've learned by the integration of the two methods. Right, you know what, maybe I'm just going to stand here. Yeah.
It'll work now.
Did you do something? No, I'm just going to stand.
This one was muted, so I had to switch it.
Okay. Okay. So, ideally, can you hear me still? Good. So ideally in this type of exploratory sequential, you would first, in the methods, you would describe the design,
of both the qualitative and the quantitative, including all the elements here, setting, participants, instruments, data collection and analysis, just as you would do separately if this were just a quantitative or just a qualitative study. And then you would discuss how the mixed methods were integrated. So here's an example of a joint display. We showed this in an earlier session. And the main reason I wanted to show this is because it so infrequently happens in what we can actually do in a clinical journal. So here is a joint display of an exploratory sequential design where you have both the qualitative items, and they're actually what this one was many qualitative studies coming together. They did a systematic review and then created scales based on that qualitative data. So here you've gone from qualitative to quantitative. You know, wind tunnel? I mean, this is so bizarre. Okay. Here's another, here's an explanatory sequential. So here you're going from a quantitative data collection, like, for example, a survey, and then you're honing down with using qualitative methods on aspects that you want more depth about, okay? So, for example, here, you would first do a survey, calculate, here you're calculating practice scores on a particular measure, and then you're doing some more qualitative data collection with key informants and getting more in depth about the themes. You are in your methods, you would again describe both designs in terms of all of these factors, and then you would talk about the integration. And here's another example of a joint display. So here you've got what they did is they took these scores, and it had to do with the work relationship. It's actually the work relationship score, and they dichotomized into low versus high, and then they looked at the qualitative data to see if they correlated. And basically here is the presentation of representative quotes from the qualitative work showing how aligned it was, in fact, with the scores. And here they found very good alignment between the quant and the qualitative. And then convergent designs, which is basically you're doing the quant and the qualitative at the same time, or, you know, pretty much at the same time. In this, again, here you're, this example, you're doing both interviews and collecting data about screening rates at the same time in a practice. Here, because the design, setting, and participants is the same for both types, you're describing that together, but then separately describing instruments, data collection, and analysis for the two different methodologies, and then the integration. And here you can see this is a presentation of these data. Here's the qualitative aspects that were looked at, and here's the quantitative screening rates. So there was they were correlating conceptually, jointly looking at the relationship between the quantitative screening and the qualitative work. Boy, this is really weird.
And so, Allie, it's apparently a known problem in the screen.
Oh, okay, well, I hope it's not driving you guys crazy. Okay, so now let's talk about reality. And, you know, if you are somebody who is a mixed methodologist and you're going to journals that expect you to be producing mixed methods, you're not going to have these problems. But as you raised your hands, a lot of you are doing mixed methods in the context of clinical work, and you want to reach audiences that are going to be in those, that are going to read those clinical journals. So let's talk about some of the challenges. I think the biggest one is word limits. Word limits really constrain what I just explained in terms of the ideal. You know, presenting both methods for quantitative and qualitative.
It's good.
Okay.
This one will work fine.
Okay.
That should be good.
Is that more better? Okay. All right. So that is the biggest challenge because, you know, you've got a whole lot of limits there. The other problem is in these clinical journals, a lot of them, you have a lack of reviewers who are supportive of mixed methods or qualitative methods in general, and who are at all knowledgeable about how to evaluate, particularly the qualitative. A lot of our clinical journals are historically very quant focused. So they may not even be interested in your work, number one, but they also may not be in a position to evaluate your qualitative methods. And what we have is a lot of siloing. Journals that sort of specialize in single methodologies, and the mixed methods or qualitative journals tend to focus on articles that are about the methods. So a lot of what qualitative or mixed methods journals are publishing are about methods in mixed methods or qualitative methods. And a lot of the clinical journals aren't publishing any qualitative or mixed methods. So that's a real dilemma for people who are working in health sciences and want to use mixed methods. Okay, so how do you choose a journal? I mean, this is true for any paper, right? The biggest thing to think about is who you want to reach. How broad an audience, how focused an audience, and where will your findings have the biggest effect? Who do you really want to reach? So for me, it's usually pediatrics, health services research, you know? So that narrows my journals a lot. It wouldn't do me a whole lot of good to publish a mixed methods study about, you know, increasing immunization delivery in the Journal of Mixed Methods. That isn't going to get to my audience. And then secondly, as we just discussed, is the focus of the manuscript the results that you got from the mixed methods, or is it methodologic issues? Because if it's really methodologic issues, then it would be very appropriate for a qualitative or mixed methods journal. Has the journal you're thinking about published mixed methods or any qualitative work? Sometimes, you know, when I first started trying to do mixed methods research, I would just look at the journals I wanted to publish and see if I could find any, because sometimes that's a real struggle. It's getting to be less of a struggle, but it's still a struggle. And what are the word limits or are there any special dispensations for mixed methods or qualitative work? Sometimes some journals say, if you're doing a mixed method, we'll give you a little bit more. Okay, so the ideal, which I've achieved once, is a single integrated article. And why have I achieved this once? Well, almost all of my work is pragmatic trials. I should say qualitative methods, developing a pragmatic trial, qualitative methods to understand the results of the pragmatic trial. Pragmatic trial by itself usually is a very big manuscript. So it's very tough to do mixed methods in that context. So maybe that's why I've had so little success. But anyway, I've tried lots. So you so within those constraints, you may need to do things slightly differently than the ideal I just showed you. You may need to provide sort of emblematic quotes and themes in a table and include relatively few quotes in the paper, because you may get away with a much larger table than you could by putting quotes into the paper. However, and the methods may need to be abbreviated, even though you have to have all those elements, right, in order for somebody to analyze the quality of your work. You may abbreviate them somewhat. Another thing that some journals will let you do is have addendums or appendices that you can publish online. I do want to point out that the inclusion of joint data displays, very uncommonly can you do that. Now, actually, the examples I showed you were from Annals of Family Medicine. So that's one journal. Family medicine in general tends to be a little bit
more lenient about that. But I have had zero success in the clinical journals I go to displaying joint data. I just don't, I don't have the bandwidth to do that. The other thing you can do is publish quantitative and qualitative results in separate journals and connect them in terms of, you publish one first, usually for me it's the pragmatic trial, and then I do a qualitative paper that lends insight to the results. Now that's unfortunate because then you have to, connect the dots, but often that's the best I've been able to do. The other thing you can do is submit both together. If the timing works out well, you can submit both the qualitative and the quantitative to the same journal and ask the editor if that was, if they're interested in that. So that's another thing you can do. I've done that once. So here's some examples of clinical journals and their word limits these are the journals I apply to. Academic Peds is the only one that I apply to that specifically calls out qualitative and mixed methods data. It says, we welcome that. But their word limit is 3,500. So most of the rest of these Peds, 3,000, JAMA Peds, 3,000, AJPH, 3,500. American Journal of Preventive Medicine is 3,000 unless you're a nurse and Peds, 4,000. Preventive Medicine, 3,500, Vaccine, 3,000. So these are the journals I submit to, and those are the limits I have to live with. So here's some examples of journals that specifically have a mixed methods or qualitative focus, and look at these lengths. Qualitative health research, no word limit. They like it to be less than 30 pages. Social science and medicine, up to 8,000 words. So twice as many words. Journal of Mixed Methods Research, 10,000 words for empirical studies, 8,000 for methodologic or theoretical. And again, they are focusing a lot on methods. The International Journal of Qualitative Methods, 7,500, and Qualitative Research Journal up to 8,000. So you can see that, more than twice the number of words. So that's one of our dilemmas as clinicians. Okay, I'm going to show you a couple of examples of my work and the limited success I have had in this area. So here is an example of a multi-phase design study. I've been studying ways to improve immunization delivery at the population level. So this was a large pragmatic trial in which we took 14 Colorado counties and we randomized them in a balanced manner to 2 interventions at the population level. One intervention was one in which we incentivized and taught practices to do practice-based reminder recall, and the other in which the state health department conducted reminder recall using the state immunization registry for children and basically recall children in a centralized manner. Okay, so these are very different approaches in terms of where the locus of action is. So here's the publication of the pragmatic trial, and this was a long article because there was lots of data there and lots to explain. There's no way we're going to be able to do mixed methods with this pragmatic trial. So just to show you the results, for example, this is the percentage brought up to date within 6 months. That was 19 in population-based, 13 in the practice-based, and with an absolute effect difference of 6%, which at the population level is very large. This is the percent receiving any vaccine, 32% at the population level versus 23% at the practice level. And probably equally importantly, the costs were substantially different. $10 per child who received 1 or more vaccine in the population-based approach versus 38 in the practice-based approach. So the conclusions from this trial were, at a population level, the centralized approach was much more effective and cost-effective than trying to incentivize practices and teaching them. We we thought that an optimal approach would be collaborative between the practices and the public health department, so that the practices would put their name on their mind recall, and it could sort of seem to come from them. That might be the best of all worlds. And it would be potentially even less costly if practices would assist with updating information. So, you know, in order to justify that further approach, we needed more information about the acceptability of this approach, both from the practice and patient's perspective. So we needed, first of all, we did a quantitative survey of all primary care physicians in those counties. So we wanted specifically to talk to the people who had been part of the population-based reminder recall to get their perspective on, you know, was it good, was it okay, what was their attitude about it. We then did an explanatory sequential design and did semi-structured qualitative interviews of 2 to 3 staff at randomly selected practices within that subgroup, okay? So the survey didn't allow us to get into the level of detail we wanted to, and didn't allow us to talk to people other than PCPs, you know, people like the front desk people. What kind of problems did it cause for them? What kind of telephone calls did they have that they didn't know what to do with? You know, all kinds of things that happen at the practice level. So this is my mixed methods publication. My only successful mixed methods publication in one article. And it's from Academic Peds because they're most accepting to this particular type of methodology. So the methods were, the objectives were basically to assess PCP's current reminder recall practices, their preferences for collaboration with the health department, attitudes about different types of reminder recall, and their experiences specifically with the population-based reminder recall we conducted. So we did this post-RCT survey and subsequent semi-structured interviews, which was explanatory sequential, and then we integrated the quantitative and qualitative findings. Oh, actually, so I don't have a picture of this because we were not able to put in a big table that, you know, with both methodologies. What we did is we first reported the quantitative findings primarily in a table, because it was a survey, and then in the text, we summarized the qualitative findings and how they related to the quantitative, and we had represented a few, very few representative quotes with each of the themes that we identified. So, you know, not exactly the full display that you would have liked, but it actually worked out quite well. Okay, so here's more examples of publications that I've done. This was a large pragmatic trial of school-located vaccination of adolescents with billing. Very challenging, big trial, and a lot of results. So that was published as one pragmatic trial, and then subsequently a qualitative discussion about parent attitudes about the intervention. So those were separate articles published in the same journal. Here's another example. This was another pragmatic trial looking at effectiveness and cost of bidirectional text messaging for adolescent vaccines. And in a different journal, we published an article about non-initiation, non-completion of HPV vaccine from both English and Spanish-speaking parent perspectives. So these were both related to the same project, again, in completely different journals, and the time was different. So that's not ideal, but that's the more common route I've had to take. Okay, now, Bethany is going to talk about a different perspective, and then maybe we can come back and discuss your experiences.
Okay, you ready? All right.
So I think that value nicely articulated, especially when you're aiming for describing your clinical outcomes, the effectiveness of your interventions, but it can be very challenging to publish a single mixed methods piece. I wanted to talk specifically about publishing in around the studies of implementation. And I see Jody's here, and mostly I'm going to be presenting on what she has done successfully, and so I hope I can say. All right. So when your study addresses implementation, implementation refers to kind of the process and context in which an intervention is meant to occur, and strategies that you use to influence the way practice is delivered, for instance. So if you're studying the implementation of a vaccine promotion program, how are you working with clinicians and staff in the practices to help them deliver care differently to their patients? And there are journals that are specifically geared towards publishing the results of an evaluation of the study of implementation. So the big one is implementation science. Implementation science is a pay for publishing journal. It does have a fee for publishing, but it's a great place to go to publish implementation science types of projects. Now there are some clinical journals that will be amenable to qualitative and mixed methods. So in primary care, the Journal of the American Board of Family Medicine seems pretty open to it, whereas academic pediatrics sounds like in the peds realm, that was one open to it there. And then there are method-specific journals as well. So how are mixed methods, papers, and implementation potentially more feasible within word and page limits, even those that are in the like 4,000 word range? So the quantitative analysis for implementation studies could tend to be based more on process metrics with relatively straightforward analytic approaches, descriptive statistics, not terribly complicated analyses that take a long time to explain. And then also the qualitative findings, you could maybe be more selective rather than more comprehensive as one way to streamline the paper. And then also the use of joint data displays makes really efficient use of space. So tables and figures are often not included in the word count, and so that's one way to get around it. Okay. So when you are publishing papers on implementation, there is of course, standards for reporting that I wanted to reference for everyone. So the STARI framework, which is published in the BMJ last year, to follow this framework, it really inherently requires a mixed methods approach to do everything that they're describing within this framework. And this is just a little bit of an excerpt of the STARI framework. So standards for reporting implementation studies. So from the very beginning, you want to show that your paper is about implementation. So just like in reporting other types of studies, you want to mention your design. In implementation, you want to put the word implementation in your title. And then here's some of the checklist items for describing your methods of evaluation. And something really important in implementation is in reporting implementation studies is distinguishing between your implementation strategy and your clinical intervention. So for instance, if your clinical intervention is counseling patients on the value of exercise or smoking cessation, that's your intervention. Do we know that counseling on smoking cessation is effective? Yes. How do we actually get the clinics to counsel their patients on smoking cessation? Well, that's our implementation strategy. What are you doing? Are you doing audit and feedback? Are you doing practice facilitation? Are you providing group training? All the things that you often as the researchers are doing to try to get the clinical intervention actually delivered. And there are mixed methods approaches to evaluating both of those things. So in an implementation paper, you want to evaluate the implementation strategy and evaluate the intervention. And you could try to do all that in one paper, but that would be very difficult. And so maybe a paper really focused on implementation strategies and evaluating the implementation strategies, especially in an implementation interested journal, would be one way to incorporate all of the mixed methods in one place. Okay, so here's an example of a mixed methods publication. This is published in a journal called Family Systems and Health, And this is a journal from the American Psychological Association, the APA. Different types of APAs, I know, this one's psychology. And this paper is on an evaluation that Micah over there and I did of a collaborative care implementation in Niagara Falls. So collaborative care is the integration of behavioral health specialists into primary care teams where the primary care provider and the behavioral health specialist work together to provide care to a patient within the primary care setting. So they don't have to go elsewhere. They talk to each other, they collaborate, they have a shared care plan, ideally. There are several different models of collaborative care, of integrated behavioral health. Collaborative care is one that was first established by the Group Health Cooperative. Lots of evidence on its effectiveness. So the question wasn't whether collaborative care was effective. The question was whether the practice that was implementing it was doing a good job implementing it. Were they still seeing the effectiveness outcomes that were typically seen in the randomized controlled trials that have been done? And the way that they've been implementing it, the training they've received, the way they've been engaging clinicians in their practice, have they actually been doing the intervention? And so we use the REAIM framework for evaluating this collaborative care implementation. Who's familiar with REAIM? Russ is very pleased. So of course the key elements of REAIM are reach. So the number of people that you're reaching among your eligible population, who's participating, the effectiveness. Is it actually having an effect on your outcomes that you see in the randomized trials, are you seeing it in clinical practice? The adoption. How many of the clinicians are doing this at all? The implementation, and so are they actually doing the things that are required to be considered a collaborative care model? Are those process metrics happening as you expect them to? And then finally, maintenance. So is this something that the system has identified that they would like to do moving forward? So a couple interesting things you might see here. Our authors, our co-authors here, in addition to Mike and I, who are the evaluation team, are actually the CEO and the director of operations for the hospital system that was implementing this. So this is where stakeholder engagement can be really important in this method. So as we're bringing the data and interpreting it together in this method, getting insights from the health system about what it was that we were hearing and what it all meant. And so what we published was the whole shebang, all of the REAIM pieces. They're just a little bit each of them. And it was a very long paper. We were asked probably 15 times to cut it down even more, even more. And in fact, at one point, the editor, not even one of the reviewers, the editor went through and line edited the whole paper, saying, here's where you need more succinct. Thank you. But they did eventually publish it, so that's great. And it did take some back and forth to communicate with the editor about what it is that we're trying to convey here and where the mixed methods parts of it were important. So what you see in this table 1 here is both the things that are numbers, the quantitative as well as the qualitative. And we often use the qualitative to understand or explain some of the quantitative things we were seeing. So when there weren't a lot of patients who were getting better, when the effectiveness wasn't there, well, why? Well, then we went to other aspects of the quantitative data and we said, oh, it looks like the referral rates are really low. And so why aren't the providers referring patients to the behavioral health specialist? Oh, it's because they think they've got it under control. And then also sometimes it wasn't that patients weren't agreeing to participate when they were actually referred. It's that they wouldn't actually follow through on their appointments. They were having trouble keeping their appointments. And so we went back to the qualitative and interviewed patients and said, why aren't you showing up? And they told us, oh, well, we really need help reminding us. We're not sure how to do this. This is different. And so the clinic was able to integrate that into a quality improvement process so that they're getting more reminders and explaining to patients how this worked. So this was a very iterative mixed methods approach. Things changed over time. This is also a challenge for publication. This was an evaluation. It was meant to be quality improvement. But trying to get reviewers to accept that look, the way this looked at the beginning wasn't the way it looked at the end, can be a very difficult thing to communicate. And so family systems and health is a good journal, but it's not, you know, maybe gonna get you on the front page of any newspapers. All right, and I have a series here that Jody provided of examples of mixed methods papers that she's published. You'll see these are almost all exclusively on implementation as well. And Jody's already talked about qualitative comparative analysis, but here's an example of a qualitative comparative analysis that she did on one of her registry implementation projects. This was published in the Journal of American Board of Family Medicine. That's a better journal than Family Systems and Health. And then Jody's done a lot of work on care management and studying not only effective models of care management, but effective strategies for implementation of care management. Specifically understanding the context in which care management is being implemented, what kinds of practices and what kinds of do better with different models. And so here, again, she's used REAIM. You'll see this a lot in implementation studies, really thinking about not just the effectiveness of the intervention, but who's getting it, how was it implemented, what do we learn about that process, where is this going well, for which populations. And you'll see, again, there was a little bit of quantifying qualitative data. And this was published in Implementation Science, so this is a great achievement. Very precise.
That's a quick question. So in the case where you just have qualitative data that's quantitatively analyzed, is that considered a classic mixed methods paper, or is that, do you need two separate analyses sort of brought together?
Jody or Megan, do you want to comment on that?
I'd say it's still, you know, you're doing transformation instead of convergence or expansion, but you're still utilizing both methods. You're saying if you have qualitative only and you transform that to quantitative and you don't have any quantitative to mix with it?
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess I think so, but it's rare that happens. I don't think it's happened to me because we always have quantitative and qualitative. I don't know.
Yeah. You might get your hands slapped a little bit. Just because, like, yeah, a purist might say, but where was your data collection for your quantitative? And so it's revolving. So. but there's probably different camps.
Great question, Heather. And then this is an interesting paper. So this is in the Journal of Mixed Methods Research, and this paper is framed as introducing health services research, which is what we do in course primarily, introducing this methodology or this approach to research to the mixed methods audience. And so here, this paper describes the methods that were used for two different types of analysis, for two different analyses. One was a QCA, and one is what this last paper was, the qualitative to quantitative data transformation procedures. And it was published in Mixed Methods Research, so I guess they agree that it is a mixed method. And then here's one more from Jody. This is definitely more along the lines of the qualitative to quantitative type of transformation. I think it's actually one of the ones that's referenced in the Journal of Mixed Methods paper. Is that right? One of the studies, maybe? I think so. But here, the underlying theoretical framing of normalization process theory for understanding implementation and implementation-related research questions, that the grounding in theory is also in and of itself something else that I think increases the rigor of your paper. And so it's not just about your quantitative and qualitative methods, but also the theory that you're integrating into the way that you're presenting your findings, and the way that you're incorporating existing evidence, and the way that you're incorporating, triangulating from not just your data, but also from theory. and also at times what stakeholders, or like the CEO of the hospital and the people that I presented, triangulating your data to demonstrate that your conclusions are actually valid. Because ultimately, when it comes to publication, that's what we care the most about, is are we making valid conclusions? Okay. So we have lots of time for questions. Before we get into questions, I wanted to highlight just a couple things. So we had intended for this to be our last mixed method seminar series, but we had more stuff to tell you about. So we have two more. One is Russ Lasco is going to be here next month talking about data displays using the extended consort diagram. So all of these papers that I just showed you using REAIM, he has a nice joint data display method to actually do that. And then, because there was so much interest on qualitative comparative analysis following our last talk, we have the pleasure of a guest of Claude Rubinson, who is a QCA expert. This is a collaborator of Jody's who will be here for other purposes, but we've managed to get him to agree to come here to talk. And was this a 1 or 2 hour thing, Jody? I can't remember.
Well, it was, I think what we discussed is a 1 hour overview at lunchtime, which would be April 25th, I think. And then like the next day, a 2 hour more in depth for people who are really serious about kind of digging into it a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And that's
talked about. I don't know if
that sounds right. I couldn't remember. That's where I had that 1 and 2 hour. And so stay tuned for more information on those. Megan.
And we'll have Leslie Curry, who also will be talking about mixed methods on April 24th.
Yes, okay, so Leslie Curry, another mixed methods presentation. Leslie's coming from where?
Yeah.
From Yale. So also stay tuned for that if you're interested in this topic. There's lots more to come. I already mentioned our MHealth seminar series. And don't forget to fill out the evaluation. So, questions? Oh, so if you do have a question in front of you, you'll see little remote controls. They have a red dot on them. If you want to talk, maybe.
You can discuss your challenges.
How to write about mixed methods in grant proposals.
In grant proposals. This is where requesting a consultation with the qualitative core is highly, and incorporating a qualitative mixed methods researcher as a co-investigator in your proposal would be recommended.
Yeah, I mean, I think
the main thing is to be as rigorous as you would be with quantitative methods. You need to have all the methods there and talk about all the things we laid out. How are you going to integrate them? What's the theoretical background? But I always go to Megan when I need to.
Other questions, comments, horror stories, success stories?
I mean, need the rest of you, how many people in this room have actually published a mixed methods paper aside from? Oh, good, good.
Where have you published?
I had many of the challenges that you talked about, and I ended up, it was work done in Latin America, and I ended up having to publish in a local Spanish language journal. I had to write the article in Spanish.
Wow, local Spanish journal in South America.
Global health science and practice.
Global health or global health science and practice?
Women in health, it was a community-based research study with women in health.
Women in health.
So what was the word limit on these? Do you remember?
It
I
was
think
around 4,500, 4,000.
What about
6,000.
6,000 for the Spanish.
That's what you want.
Any others?
Disability in health.
Disability and health,
And have either 35 or
3,500 or 4,000.
American Journal of Community Psychology.
American Journal of Community Psychology,
You remember the word limit?
I want to say it was 5,000.
5,000 times. I'm hearing sort of a theme there. So those that are interested in kind of social sciences, specific community populations. Yeah, right.
I'll just say my experience. I did have reviewers, I called it mixed methods, and they said I wasn't allowed to
Okay.
because it didn't have a p-value.
Oh, no p-values, makes it not mixed methods.
Yes, they, even though it was quantitative, like count descriptive, and there was descriptive statistics on it, they said it did not count as a mixed methods because the quantitative was not rigorous enough. And so I just didn't name it. And it got published.
Okay. What other successes? Any challenges that anyone's currently experiencing in this regard where you'd like some advice from the crowd? Yeah.
I just kind of did something along the lines of what Ally mentioned, published 2 articles. And I asked the editor to send them to the same reviewers, and it didn't happen. Each set of reviewers was asking for something in the other article. And I answered both, and then they sent them out to reviewers, and I decided to combine it. And so I had to kind of do that, and so it's a clinical journal, Journal of Allergy, Clinical Immunology. So they were more in the clinical outcomes, and I think we'll go back, like you said, and go back to more of the methods and talk about the implementation aspect. But if you're going to submit it to her, you just have to hope the editor reads the cover letter and sends it to both.
So the use of a cover letter, something you just indicated about communicating your intent for the papers, the way that they fit together, how, so often it's the case when you're submitting a paper for publication, you need to say other papers that have been published on or are under review for that same study. And so that's an opportunity to say, look, it's out here if you want it. Maybe we can combine it or look for this separately.
Yeah, I would say you're right about the clinical trials. Just a lot of them just are not in that mindset. They're randomized controlled trials and just kind of want the nuts and bolts, and the impact, and they don't want to get into the lessons learned.
I haven't kind of caught up with what's happening in research.
Have you seen that change at all over the last few years, Abby?
No, I'm old enough to probably comment on that. Not the last few, I mean, compared to 10 years ago, yeah. And in my field, academic needs is the one that's really kind of got that now. They understand mixed methods, but still very hard to get. And honestly, the highest level, the most prestigious journals are the ones that are least open to this, unfortunately.
Which is a challenge. So I'll ask a question, is how do you deal with having a team in which you did a mixed method study, but the team is worried that the qualitative is going to water it down, and so you have to go to a lower impact journal, and so they want to split it up so that the quantitative can be aimed for the higher impact journal?
Well, the truth is, from my experience, you often have to divide it up anyway, so, I mean, it hasn't been, in my experience, it hasn't been, team. It's been more just the reality. I can see many clinicians saying that we want this to get into a high impact, we don't want to have qualitative methods in there. And, it's for legitimate reasons in a way, because you're likely to get reviewers who don't understand or like those methods. So that's a reality. I mean, that is, for all of those reasons, that's why, I only showed you 2 examples of dividing up my work. I think it's happened to me like 10 times where I've published qualitative and quantitative on the same trial.
Even this evaluation that we did, the collaborative care implementation evaluation, the qualitative was really very focused and very selective. We have a lot more qualitative data and qualitative results than we reported in this paper because we really used the qualitative selectively to answer questions that were that emerged in the interpretation of the quantitative. So that's weird. I wonder why that was. Or patients are showing up and when they are showing up, their depression outcomes aren't really improving. Why might that be? And so the focus groups that we did with patients provided a little bit of insight into what they found valuable and the way that they were incorporating what they were getting out of the behavioral health care into their lives. And it was like way, way upstream factors. And so our conclusion was, well, the patient population here in this real world setting was they had so many basic needs that needed to be met before they could really even start working on their depression. They needed to help, they needed to get out of domestic violence situations. They needed to get out of the house because they were so socially isolated. So really basic needs that needed to be addressed first in this population. And so kind of the CEO and the VP of operations were really committed to this model, but if they weren't, they could have easily used our lack of effectiveness findings to justify not continuing to deliver care this way. But with the qualitative, we were able to demonstrate to them where the issues were happening, where the concerns were, and they were able to continue justifying delivering care using the model. And so your qualitative data can be used for other things other than your publications. Now, that's not good for your qualitative researchers. They need to be published too in high quality journals. But you can be selective in order to get published and then also utilize the qualitative for other purposes. Ryan?
Russ has a question online. Go ahead, Russ.
Thanks, Brian. Can you hear me okay?
You're quiet, but yes.
Okay, I'll speak a little louder. Just two questions that's a little different than what you talked about, but in terms of getting grant funding as opposed to where I think it's related to publishing. And the questions related are, do you have any advice for writing grant proposals to study sections that often don't have the qualitative research, or if they do, they're clearly outnumbered? And then secondly, a little closer to home, working with interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary teams, the kind of notion of team science, and how to kind of present your methods in both cases so that they're understood and maybe more I don't know if it's more important, but respected by more quantitative researchers or traditional, folks that, just show me the data or the results.
So similar to your question earlier about how do you write about mixed methods approaches, and we said, go ask Megan. But Megan, do you want to comment on that a little bit more about what you've seen as an effective strategy?
I would say particularly for qualitative or grants, it is you have to do a lot of size. Here's the literature, here's your justification for the sample size. I think you have to do a little bit more, almost like educating the reviewer as you go along, which is always, of course, challenging when word and page limits of grant applications, but sometimes even just a brief half sentence to really kind of demonstrate and advocate for, again, the principles of qualitative research and why you're doing it. And I think also there are more reporting guidelines out there. So the correct, for example, even citing it, cite that in the grant application, saying we are following reporting yes, it's the reporting guidelines, but we're using the similar guidelines to really help design and inform our qualitative
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. And both in study sections and as somebody who is applying, it's very powerful to do things like, we're using NIH's published guidelines on rate. You know, it's almost like underlining, this isn't like some crazy idea of ours. NIH thinks this is okay. I remember when I started doing pragmatic trials, it's the same kind of thing. People who were trialists were like, this is messy, pragmatic trials. You know. And it really helped when NIH, created the guidelines for pragmatic trials. And then we could quote them and we looked like we were on the right side of science. So I think a lot of substantiating that you are using the right methods from organizations they care about is a big deal.
Not get too jargony.
All right, well, it is 12:59. So thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you, Ally, for presenting, and thank you, Megan and Julie, for preparing content.
Court? Yeah, just, oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, these are good workshops. Good luck.